Welcome to All Villa, No Filler. Please subscribe to the show. Follow us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. This is Rivalries, the show where we meet fans from rival clubs. The Premier League season, it's drawing near. The excitement is growing. And today I'm joined by Newcastle fan Freddie Bunn. He's chairman of the Newcastle Supporters Club in London, also known as the London Mags, good friends / rivals of the London Lions. Freddie, welcome back to All Villa, No Filler.
Hello, yes, third time I think, and yeah, can't wait. Always a good chat when we get on, Frankie.
Yeah, Eddie, we see the passion of the Newcastle fans because I always feel these episodes get lots of views. So maybe you're just super popular or Newcastle are super popular. I don't know which one it is. Well, Freddie, firstly, interesting summer for Newcastle. Today, we'll talk a little bit more about the summer, but we'll start off on the breaking story from today. David Ornstein of The Athletic has said that Newcastle are in talks to sign Jacob Ramsey from the Villa. How do you feel about
that? Well, it's an interesting one, and I think it's kind of interesting that we're on this podcast today talking about this because he's English and he's young and it works very well, and I think that is a big goer for Eddie Howe. He's always liked English players, and I think from the player side, there might be a bit of looking at it and going, Eddie Howe is a really good development kind of Monday to Friday coach to bring players through, and has seen what he's done with people like Anthony Gordon and other aspects like that. But my one question is, I'd always put that back on you and say, how do you think that's come about, and why would Villa be looking for that transfer? Do you think they would or not? Like, that seems a strange one.
Yes, it sort of felt all summer like Villa are going to have to deal with SCR and wages. But I guess the two players who would have probably fixed that the most are probably Emi Martinez and Ollie Watkins. But we can't lose Ollie, really. And I think there was noise about Emi Martinez going. It felt like it was probably going to happen. But that just hasn't happened. Maybe the club he wanted didn't come in for him. Ramsey he's probably, I don't imagine he's one of our top earners. But I'd say he's more PSR. So June 30th next year, pure profit player. And it's probably a player that in the last 2 years with Villa, since he got a foot injury and was out almost for an entire season, this year, he's not quite kicked on in the way you would probably hope now. And I think by this stage of his career, he's probably hoping to have played for England at least once. Whereas Newcastle, maybe a whole new environment. And when I look at Newcastle and think of how you play, I've seen people mention, well, you've already got Harvey Barnes and Anthony Gordon who play out left. But I think when I look at Jacob Ramsey, I actually think of him as somebody who might be able to play in that kind of Joelinton role, quite physical. He matches kind of Newcastle's, physical hurly-burly style where you get into other teams' faces. You can counter-attack. He's very quick at that. So I think I can see how he suits a sort of Eddie Howe team. And he still has improvements to make as well. And I personally, he's one of our own. I don't want to see him go, but I can also kind of see if Newcastle make a big bid for him in the 40 to 50 million mark, then I can see why the temptation is there to sell him.
Yeah, and I think also what you say about that, Frankie, our two clubs would probably know this very well, which is that we've got Europe for a few seasons now where we've got a really, really strong first team. But also when you talk about that kind of Joelinton role, is also about having the Champions League, and you'll know this full well. By December, where is that squad going to be? And I think depth has become really important. And I'm sure we'll talk about other headlines around Newcastle United over the last kind of month or so, because there's plenty of them at the moment and not necessarily that positive. But one of the positive areas where we have done really well this window is looking at things like depth and looking at, Ramsdale, looking at other players like Elanga and other things that are going to alleviate a bit of pressure, because there's no way you can play Eddie Howe's style of football, which is, intensity is our identity, because by December, you're going to be looking threadbare.
I think that's my only kind of fear for Newcastle this season. I think I remember when you were in the Champions League, you played 6 extra games. You had an absolutely shocking injury crisis, as did a few teams that year. I think Villa, we had a bad one as well. Man United had a really bad one. But I just think of the way you play football. You're very, very physical, very hard running, and you can blow teams away like you quite often do. But I think that 10 extra Champions League games, I do wonder how Newcastle balancing up and whether lessons have been learned from 2 years ago. It'd be very interesting to see if Eddie Howe's done that. And he's an intelligent coach. I'm sure there's something he's worked out. But I just wonder what sort of impact it will have on you as a team. Do you have any worries about that at all?
Massively in terms of injury crisis and stuff like that.
Injuries and kind of whether you have to adapt your style of play a bit, to cope with the 10 extra Champions League games.
Well, I think we first started showing signs of doing that last year when, the way that we approached the Cups was certainly very different. We worked out pretty early that we can't play that level all of the time. So we did start to see us kind of manage games a bit more. If you look at the way we played in the Cup final, after the Cup final, Eddie did say in terms of how we played against Liverpool, we did play them a few weeks before. And he said we held stuff back. And that's what we kind of started doing. And I think that's Eddie Howe just being on that journey. I think now we're a lot better equipped to kind of manage those games. But if you look back to 2 seasons ago when we were in the Champions League, we had PSG, Dortmund and AC Milan in that group. And it was, the last year of those sort of groups. And I was looking at you last season, and I think a lot of the London Mags were certainly looking at Villa and thinking, I'd love to be in that format. I don't really like too much change in terms of modern football. It tends to detract from kind of like the joy of things, but especially when there's heaps more games. But when you do look at the aways and the home games and how it's stretched out, I started to think, I'd love to be having a crack at that.
I did like the new format. I did like the league structure of it. It was quite interesting. I think there's too much football played now, generally in wider football everywhere, and this doesn't help it, particularly the playoff games if you end up in sort of the middle tier. But I did like the format. I think it was better, or it was kind of the sort of revolution that was needed within the Champions League because it felt like it got a little bit stale before. But with Newcastle obviously looking to the Champions League, you've signed Elanga, you might be signing Jacob Ramsey, you've got Aaron Ramsdale. But I just look at Newcastle this summer and sort of think it's been, you've been linked with a lot of players who've ended up going to United or Liverpool. It's been a funny one, hasn't it? Like, given you had Champions League, I thought you'd kick on a bit more than you have. I mean, how do you feel about this summer?
Well, I think we've finally got our club back, and now it's what it's like to be a Newcastle United fan. It's kind of, this is how it works, and how it I think it's definitely you're right. It's one of those summers where you think you've just won your first cup final in 70 years, right? And we've been 3-4 times at Wembley and not won, barely even scored and laid a glove on people. And we do that this season. This was the opportunity this summer to kick on, and the problem that's come from that is a lot more behind the scenes. And I think, if you were to just indulge me, maybe your listeners might enjoy seeing a bit more behind the scenes about how it sort of operates at Newcastle United, is that when we first got taken over, we had Amanda Staveley and Mehrdad Ghodoussi. And what they did is came in, appointed Eddie Howe very quickly, but there wasn't a traditional setup there. We didn't even have Darren Eales at that stage, right? So it was very much like backroom meetings and Eddie Howe picking people and his staff picking people that he thought were good fits. And in that window, we signed Matt Targett from you guys. We signed Dan Burn. We signed Bruno Guimaraes. And then I think at Christmas we signed, I think it might have been later. I can't remember, just off the top of my head, but we signed Alexander Isak. And I think what you learn about those kind of players is that it was Eddie Howe's structure of saying, we're on the fly and this is it, siege mentality, and this is what we've got to do. Since then, we've had very publicly appointed Dan Ashworth from Brighton, who has then been played out in the media in a whole saga about him going to Man United and the kind of £10 million gardening leave, where I don't know if that man's worked a single day in the last year, but there seems to be payouts galore, etc. But what tended to happen there is that we sort of lost our structure, because I think a lot of big six clubs came in, looked at what we were doing and just went, well, we'll just do what they're doing. A little bit much like how Brighton have had to adapt to things for people following their model. It's a very famous model that people now try and follow. You've then had organizational structures like we ended up getting, we had Darren Eales, who's unfortunately become unwell and can no longer work under the pressure of a full-time environment.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, which is, obviously Darren Eales has been a great servant to the club, and he came over from, I think it's from Atlanta in America,
right?
Or I can't remember, but he was big in the MLS and he's done very, very well. Just started getting the ball rolling, but then he's now had to move on. We've also then had Paul Mitchell, who replaced Dan Ashworth. Yeah. And two crucial things have happened, and those crucial things is that Darren Eales, it's been a year now since that was announced, pretty much. However, we still haven't got a replacement. So we haven't got a replacement for that role. And then Paul Mitchell left after a dinner with the Saudis after the final game of the season. The next day, it was pretty much announced that we're not moving in the same direction. Therefore, Paul Mitchell is leaving. Is that a Paul Mitchell problem? Is that a club organisational structure? Couple that with the fact that Amanda Staveley and Murdoch Caducci sold up. And that partly could be because we were getting affected by PSR and we had to sell Elliot Anderson on deadline day, along with a number of other things. Therefore, behind the scenes, it doesn't feel like we've got the coherent plan of where we were expecting to be right now. We haven't made that leap from being siege mentality challenger club to actual Big Six, top 7 progressive club with a 5-year plan. That hasn't really come to fruition. And I think it's going to be difficult for Eddie in between now and Christmas, because I feel like I talked about this just as a joke, is about getting our club back. It sort of feels a little bit like almost like the Pardew era under Ashley. Not in any way in footballing terms, don't get me wrong, but in the way that it's a very passionate city, it's a very passionate fan base, it's a very passionate football club. But Eddie Howe seems to currently be fielding the question of every single employee across the whole of the football club and structure.
Yes. Yeah.
Whilst he's always been the guy that's been like, I'm a football manager and I don't want to talk about this. So that's the crossroads we're kind of at.
That was exactly what just as an outsider, that was kind of what I thought looking in, is that, Paul Mitchell came in a year ago and seemed to immediately alienate Eddie Howe, which was quite incredible, and then was gone within a year. So it just shows how difficult it is to get it all right behind the scenes. And then when you do it, that's when the club as a whole can keep going forward. And it's just, different. Like Eddie Howe, like it just feels like he's got a lot on his plate at the moment. But we'll see. I mean, how do you feel kind of going into the upcoming season now? Has the summer slightly, giving you a slightly negative vibe, or are you feeling still confident that you can go on and do something?
It's given me a negative vibe about where goals are coming from.
Right. Well, we're going to get to that.
Yeah, a lot of the dynamic has come from, like, Murphy can score, Barnes can score, Gordon can score. They can all score. Bruno can score, Joelinton can get up there, Fabian share balls from the back. We've got different patterns of play, and we've got those sorts of things. However, we have let go of Callum Wilson, who's gone to West Ham. We've got Will Asula. Is he ready for that level of start? Is he up to where even the goals that Callum Wilson could get you? He's still kind of playing in the cups. Very useful squad player. Definitely one to watch in 18 months or 2 years. It's a worry about where the goals are coming from. However, massive positives is that we are strengthening. This group now has got the benefit of experience. You've still got Trippier behind the scenes. You've still got Bruno is evolved into the captaincy role now. Joelinton is just a different beast entirely. So you've still got all of these things. But what I would probably look at and say is a bit of a worry is about where the goals are going to come from.
Yes. So unfortunately for Newcastle, this summer's been really overshadowed by what's happening with Alexander Isak. Liverpool heavily linked. Liverpool have made a bid. Isak, according to some reports, are saying he's never playing for Newcastle again. He didn't go on the pre-season trip to Asia, I think it was. Well, what do you make of what's going on with Isak? It's incredible, really.
It's one of those things that makes you really realise why you don't try and follow too much transfer news online daily. Yeah. Because it's so, the odds are so stacked against you. There's so many different vested interests. Who knows really what's actually going on and what's actually happening? It's really impossible to see. What we do know is that Isak has been a phenomenal player for the club, has kind of shocked the world really in terms of how he plays. I'm not surprised that there would be people interested. I'm not surprised that there would be people behind the scenes that would be talking to Alexander Isak, or in terms of his staff or his team, etc., about how he's doing and where he potentially looks to go next. What is a bit shocking in it is in terms of, I think towards the end of last season, he was having a few games out, and it was that he had a thigh injury. It was kind of, that's fine. You will all remember, fast strikers in the past. You've got to watch the thigh and the hamstring and things like that. I totally understand that in terms of the level of games that he's played with the intensity that we play at. However, now it looks a little bit more like he might have, if you believe reports, requested to leave before the end of the season and said, this is what I want to do. There is also rumours that he was offered before Amanda Staveley left the club he was offered a new contract with more money. And then when Paul Mitchell came in and Amanda Staveley left, he was then told that money doesn't exist anymore. Now, that is, again, these are sort of some of the reports of what's been going on. But do we know that's true? No, it's all just what you hear on the grapevine and hearsay, and it could be different camps saying things. So, but what it looks very clearly like is that there's been a complete communication breakdown. And then also Eddie Howe, who does he talk to? Because he doesn't really have, he needs to, at the end of the day, if he does need a bit of a knockdown, Eddie Howe needs to be the one to pick him back up and and reintegrate him back into that squad. But from the issues that I told you about kind of technical directors and who we have, who is there to kind of currently play good cop, bad cop with Eddie Howe? It's kind of Eddie Howe putting on one hat and then trying to put on and then doing the arm around him. It doesn't really work and it doesn't really stack up. So it's been a kind of a very strange summer. I was very shocked to see the news come out this morning. The language like he's being adamant that he's played his last game.
Yeah.
I wonder how it almost makes me wonder how true that is. I don't know what you think as a kind of fan from outside of the camp of it.
It feels to me exactly as you said, a communication breakdown. And the reports I'm seeing about him saying before the end of the season that he was done, even a year ago, he's been unsettled for about a year. I've seen reports of that as well. It sort of makes you feel like, well, this has probably been on the cards. And I think that had Newcastle had a little bit more, less of the sort of problems they've had with Stavey leaving, Eels with his really sad illness, and then you've got Paul Mitchell with it just all going very, very wrong with him. If it had been a bit more coherent and structured, maybe this would have been solved with a new contract that would have been solved where they'd have gone, we know he's leaving, we know we're going to get a massive sum of money, let's use it to go and really sort our team, fix what we need to fix in our team, whilst also being able to sign a really good striker to replace him. So I think that's what it feels like. That's what Newcastle maybe should have done just as an outsider. But it's very easy to say that when, you've got a player like Alexander Isak and it's just like, he's so incredible that it's very hard to lose him, isn't it? But yeah, it's interesting. It's odd. I just didn't really see it coming. Given you got Champions League, you just won a trophy. I thought it was all building towards something different. But not to say that if you do sell him now before the end of the window, then you can still go and buy. But it just would have been better if he'd been 2 months ago than it being right at the end of the window, really. Yeah,
I also find it. I do find it a bit strange as well, because I'm sure you get this as well as a fan from someone like Villa, where it's like we're not like we're not finishing 14th. Like, this is Champions League football.
Yeah.
If not now, then Christmas. There's a way to do that behind closed doors, where you can sort of make those arrangements. So it does make you wonder what has happened to make the news coming out to the fan base things like this, because like it or not, it's gonna wind people up. And it's gonna, with people who have no agency in the situation, to see news like, I'm adamant that I've played my last game, things like that, say, really? Well, we're playing in the Champions League this season. We've just won a trophy. Granted, you've been absolutely integral to doing that, but this isn't helping us kick on, and it certainly isn't. It kind of gets a little bit annoying sometimes, because it makes you think we're not a championship club that's just come up. We are in the Champions League, so I find it bizarre.
It's weird. It's very weird, and really quite kind of shocking, actually, beyond surprising. But if Isak Isak will not be there this Saturday, pretty much. we assume. So who will play up top?
God, could play Gordon as a lone striker, potentially move Murphy around. I think previously we have done it with Gordon. It's going to be Eddie Howe's going to have his hands full. I mean, we could play Asula at the same time, but really we're kind of looking a bit bleak in that department at the moment. Andy Carroll from Dagenham and Redbridge.
Get him back. He can still do it. From the lower tiers of French football last season at Bordeaux to back to Dagenham and Redbridge, up to Newcastle. Get him in. I've expected him to line up for the London Mags next season, actually, at some point, probably. Me trying to mark him out of games, it's not going to happen, is it? In pre-season, I don't know how much of it you've seen, but has there been any sign of maybe a change in how Newcastle play, or do you think it'd be pretty much more of the same?
I think the elements that we discussed previously about game management will come into it. Yeah. The one thing to know really about Eddie Howe is that Eddie Howe is a liar. Eddie Howe is an absolute liar. So whatever you think will happen, it will be something bizarre like that. He really has got that element to him where he takes it incredibly personally and he doesn't give anything away. So what we will have seen in pre-season is that Eddie, I mean, it's not like we're playing, as I'm sure you know, it's not like we're playing 90 minutes of football with an objective to win a game in pre-season. We're playing it because Eddie is trying patterns of play and he's trying players in positions and he's got a list of things in his head that he wants to try and work through. So I was thinking about this before I come on actually to here, and I was thinking, I'm not really sure how we're going to really, in terms of that, like play on Saturday when we go to Villa Park, because we've lost 4-0 to Celtic. That's been our sort of pre-season run. We played Spurs, we played Arsenal. I think we lost 3-2 to Arsenal. And then we finished with, I think, a 2-0 loss to Atletico Madrid at the Sella Cup this weekend. And now all of that tells you that we're a little bit unsettled, but at the same time, it tells you nothing at all, because Eddie Howe is the kind of person that will just completely hide his game plan. I hope we'll have a strong start. To be honest with you, I'm struggling to see us playing with anywhere near the intensity that we sort of finished last season with. I'm thinking, we didn't really have a great result against Everton on the final day of the season. And I think we were all glad to see the back of that season and qualify for the Champions League just on the skin of our teeth, really. But I do think, certainly coming up against Villa, we might struggle at Villa Park. I don't know. It's telling me, I've been there too many times and seen, I've been on too many chats with you, Frankie, where we've said something and then there's been 5-goal Villa and it's gone one way, but there's never very even. It's death or glory.
It's so funny. Every time we talk, it's like Newcastle win 5-1, Aston Villa win 4-1, Villa win 3-0, Newcastle win 4-0. It's absolutely, there can't be a rivalry like that where it's just, swings so wildly between the two. Really, really odd. Well, I mean, looking into that Villa game this Saturday, I mean, do you have any confidence? I know you lost 4-1 in, I think it was April. Obviously, the summer's been and gone now. So, do you have any hope that you can turn up at Villa and get something?
I definitely have a hope, because I think there's a lot of layers to this team now, and I don't think it's heavily reliant on having a centre forward. I think it's I think that obviously over the course of the season there's a goal expectation there, but I don't have any kind of hesitations about us having the capability to grind out a result. I think we can absolutely do that. I think what would be really interesting, and I think what a lot of fans will be looking at, is that there are a lot of times over the past 3 or 4 seasons where we have had this underdog mentality, and we have had this kind of, everyone is against us because we're challenging the big six. And I'm sure there's lots of kind of parallels to Villa's story here as well. We've been in the Championship, we've come back up again, we've solidified, we've finally had a change in ownership, and then people are telling us that we're sort of, shouldn't be there, or aren't allowed to spend the money, aren't allowed to do these things. We've done very well at being that sort of underdog. And since that's happened, there's been so many positives. And it's almost like the team's a bit drunk, if you like, because we've just won a cup. We've had those kind of, the scenes that you might have seen of the trophy parade and things like that. I think what would be really interesting now is to see how this group of players reacts to a bit of adversity and sees someone like Isak, one of their own. Whatever's going on, those players are going to know more than what we're hearing in the media and things like that. They might have had chats with him. They might have their own feelings. They might think, okay, well, maybe if he's going, this might be my time and my only time to try and get a bigger contract somewhere else, or go abroad, or do these things. So I think, not saying they will, by the way, I'm just saying I think it's a really interesting test right now to see how that group reacts, whether they go heads down. I think if you look last season, we really didn't have strong performances for the first sort of 6 or 7 weeks. We were playing badly, but getting some results, which kind of threw people. And then we got found out a little later down on in the season, focused on the cups, then got a bit of a bounce, and then, we're banging to prime for the rest of the season. But I think it'd be really interesting to see if the heads sort of drop. It will be quite a lively atmosphere on Saturday because of the whole Isak thing. And if we do find ourselves in opportunities, goal-scoring opportunities, and we don't put them in early on, I think immediately fans will be thinking, right, this is it. This is chaos now because of what's going on behind the scenes, and we're not happy. So I think there needs to be a bit of a statement.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And I think you're a very fast physical team, and I think that if you turn up at Villa, and Villa maybe start not too quickly, and you sort of get right into them with Tonali, especially Joelinton, Bruno Guimaraes in the centre. And then you've got, Gordon, Barnes, outright. You've got Elanga as well, who's a whole new option. And then a striker who, to be honest, Villa, Unai Emery's a man who prepares a lot. He knows Isak inside out. He won't know who's playing up front, and he probably won't know the dynamic of that type of player and what they might do. So that in itself could be an issue. I mean, the way I think Villa win, and it's the way we've beaten you the last 2 times we've been in Villa Park, starting fast. When Villa start fast and we score early against Newcastle at Villa Park, that tends to be when we then can kind of get away from you. But just that if we don't have that fast start, after, we start the season, start a bit more casual than usual, and we get a bit, the sort of underdog mentality of Newcastle whacks into us and they get an early goal, that's when it becomes a very, very interesting contest indeed, I think.
Yeah, I think the early goal really matters. And you've I think for both teams, because that seems to be what carries the game in the end, is that it seems to go all the way and becomes that sort of blitz, And I think you previously had quite a good way of suffocating Bruno Guimaraes on the ball. And you've had, I mean, tell me about your midfield.
The midfield, I mean, our centre midfield area, depth-wise, is genuinely one of the strongest in the league, I think. You got Yuri Tielemans, absolutely fantastic season last year. He's primed and ready to continue the same thing again. He's the man who plays a lot, and he's the man who Eddie Howe will target the most, I would say, where stop Tielemans and you probably stop Villa from functioning properly. And so I'd imagine Tonali or Guimaraes, Joelinton, one of the three of them are going to be tasked with, as soon as Villa get the ball, you stick within a certain, distance of Yuri Tielemans and you pounce on him at a specific point. And then you've got Boubacar Kamara, who again is a fantastic CDM and really is somebody who reads the game 10 steps ahead of everybody else. And then we've got the depth option of Amadou Onana. So that's real physicality and skill mixed in there, which is it really is a really strong sort of base of centre midfield that, again, against Newcastle, having Onana and Kamara really helped us, because I think there's been games in the past where Villa have been a bit physically overwhelmed by Newcastle, particularly at St James's Park. I think having Onana and Kamara particularly will really help us in that central area to compete physically. But then you've got ahead of that John McGinn, another physical player who you were linked with, actually. Very easy to underrate player, fantastic player, physically difficult. And again, he's somebody who seems to cause opposition teams more problems than I think opposition fans think he's going to. And then Ross Barkley is another backup option for Tielemans. So that central midfield area is where, if Villa can withstand the kind of ferocious press that Newcastle have a lot of the time and start to just play it around them calmly, then that is where Villa, I think, can take control of the game. Probably quite similar to what happened in April. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, well, it's interesting because from our side, you'd be coming up against, Joelinton, Bruno Guimaraes and Sandro Tonali. So there is really a lot of quality in those two midfields.
Amazing quality. Two really strong centre midfields.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it'd be interesting to see, because a lot of the game sort of gets bypassed with the high press. But it'd be really interesting to see. And then if you couple that really with another, tactic that we've got, is that we've got Fabian Schär at the back, who there's this thing of him spraying balls which can just carve open teams completely. So you might have one really set thing, but then we might just open up with a long ball, because
I think he scored a couple at Villa Park as well, actually, Schär. I think he scored last season as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. Also, if he's in your half, don't let him have the ball and don't let him have anywhere near sight of goal, because there's so many times that I've been in the leaders and just watched him when there's a deadlock and nothing's really happening and it's 0-0, and then all of a sudden he'll just have a go. And then, so we've got those sort of certain strings to our bow, which is really exciting and really, good to watch football for for a Newcastle fan, because we haven't had that a lot in recent years. We've had that, in the last 3 years. It's really growing into something.
And it's Elanga's full debut as well. He'll be right up for it. And it depends if it's Dean or Maatsen. So Maatsen offers more attacking threat against Newcastle, whereas Dean offers more defensive stability. So I think if it's Maatsen versus Elanga, I will be thinking, at some point this game, there might be a one-on-one that he doesn't win, So we'll see. We'll see. But before I ask you for a score prediction, I do just want to ask you quickly about PSR. Villa and Newcastle are obviously both in quite similar boats, where it's very difficult to challenge the sort of established so-called Big Six. I mean, I've seen a lot of noise online from Newcastle fans about it. How do you feel about PSR and the way things are?
It depends what we're being asked, really. I mean, if it's a question of should football clubs be owned by foreign states and have loads of people having lots of money and other people having not a lot of money, that's one question. If it's a question on just purely PSR, I'd kind of put it to you this way. If we were allowed to spend the money that we have through the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, this Isaac story would not be happening.
Yeah.
Just simple as that. Also, this story about Jacob Ramsey that we're talking about would not be happening. And I think that kind of draws a neat line between the two clubs of Aston Villa and Newcastle United and says, what are we here for? What is happening? Because if you look at Manchester City, how long has it been now since these charges have been put to them? Yeah. Yet Everton, Forest have all been. We've had to sell Elliot Anderson to Forest as well. How does that work out? Like, there's so many different things where we've had to sell Minte to Brighton. There's so many different points in the road where we've actually gone and found talent and done that on a budget. Yeah. But now the way that this is turning now is always coming in favour of the existing clubs. So I would kind of be okay with it if there was some consistency to what's happening. But there is no consistency. What's happened is we've had to sell homegrown talent in Elliot Anderson, and you might be having to do that with Jacob Ramsey now.
Yeah.
We've had to sell a striker that we went and found in Minte to Brighton, and he barely put on a Newcastle shirt. And then, he scored at Brighton when we went to Brighton away, and he was kind of giving it the sorry to the fans. And I'm thinking, what have you got to apologise for? You barely put on a shirt for us. But we weren't ever allowed to explore that option, because we had to sell him. That wasn't the big payday for us. We had to do it to exist for PSR. And that move has probably upset the camp in terms of the ownership. Amanda Staveley stepped away with Mirda Gadusi. And what's replaced it? Nothing. Because anyone that we've gone and got, Dan Ashworth, Man United have come in and paid £10 million just for his gardening leave. Yeah. So I don't really understand it. And I'm sure every single person listening to this feels pretty similar and feels that I'm talking like a broken record, because I am. Because I don't get it. I don't understand how Chelsea can sell parts of their ground 4 times.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden have loads of money to spend. Look at the amount of. Sort of understand Liverpool spending a lot of money this summer because they won the league. Fair enough. Yeah. But I really don't understand where is the kind of parity between teams in the league anymore. And it's quite frustrating, deeply frustrating, really, for fans to find themselves in situations where our superstar is going to walk away and we aren't able to really, unless he goes, we can't action an immediate plan. And even if we do, we've got Man United and everybody else watching our targets like a hawk and thinking, well, we'll just offer more money. And it's like, well, we could offer more money. Oh, no, but you can't. So... yeah.
It's extremely frustrating. There has to be some kind of revolution within PSR. I know it's going after this year. It's moving to SCR. Whether that really changes anything at all, that with regards to how it just seems to benefit 6 teams who were arbitrarily good when financial fair play rules came in. And the whole point they came in is because Manchester City emerged, owned by a nation state, and were able to pay the kind of money that actually did genuinely threaten the Man Uniteds, the Chelseas. And unfortunately, I think had Newcastle been able to spend whatever they wanted, it would have just led to a situation probably wherein you looked at Aston Villa, like City did back in 2008, bought Gareth Barry and James Milner. You looked at Villa and bought Watkins, Kamara, players like that. And so there seems to be, there's just a dual issue really, where there's the danger of owners who just have far too much wealth that just warps the game beyond any kind of recognition. And then also you've got a way of dealing with it in one sense, but then all it's really done is encourage you to sell youth products and sell parts of your stadium and kind of protect it at 6. Really, it's something fundamentally has to change, and people smarter than me will work it out, I would assume. But yeah, it's not. Football doesn't look like it's in the healthiest place when it is literally the case that Man United can finish 5th bottom and then just do whatever. Chelsea can have 3 terrible off years and somehow just go and buy everyone in the world. It's something just feels fundamentally wrong about that as a viewer. And I think Villa and Newcastle are both in very, very similar boats.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, I think both on a positive trajectory. We've both been through the bad times. I think that the way the years are going, I think the success, you won your trophy last year. We've both had Champions League experience. Good times are here, and I think are here to stay longer than they perhaps did in the past. Is the way I put it.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, I think I've got 4 decent away days guaranteed where I can look at going out abroad. Ticket or no ticket, let's go.
Yeah. Exactly, and hopefully you get somewhere like Barcelona. You want good weather. You don't want to be freezing, anywhere or anything like that. But Freddie, as always, it's absolutely brilliant to talk to you. Genuinely one of my favourite people to talk to on this podcast. It's always so interesting.
Oh, thank you.
Maybe we should do all Villa and Newcastle podcast of some sort. Well, dare I ask you, score prediction for this weekend?
Oh God, don't do it. Don't do it. Look at anyone. In your comment section, I would love to see people write what they think based on the last few fixtures. If you looked at the last 4 or 5, do you know what? Maybe this is the time we could have a 1-1.
I'm going 2-2.
Are you? You think you're giving us too many goals?
I might be. I forgot. Oh yeah, I forgot Isaac's not there. I think just because it's the opening day of the season, I just could see Villa not being quite as in rhythm as we might have been back in April.
Yeah,
and Newcastle, I think, will just be physical and hard and fast, and so I could see us maybe starting the season a little bit slower. Conceding 1 or 2 more than we maybe will a bit later in the season, but I still think we'll score a few. And I think if we score early, I think there's a good chance we win 3-0, 3-1.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be cautious and just say 2-2.
Do you think Villa Park will be up for it first day of the season?
Absolutely. Yeah. Noise of that place will be off the charts. Fantastic stadium, really is. Can't recommend it enough. If you can endure more miserable days there as a Newcastle fan, because there's been a few in the past, and believe me, there's been a lot for Villa fans at St James's Park. But Freddie, best of luck to you this season. I hope you have a fantastic time out in Europe. Get out there, let us know how it all goes. But for those, maybe some Newcastle fans watching in London who want to get involved with the London Mags, so how can they get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a members club with 500 members. We're going for 60 years, and you can find us at londonmags.co.uk.
And I can strongly recommend. We've hung out with them a lot, the Villa fans down here. We've hung out with the London Mags a fair amount. The Dolphin as well. It tends to be King's Cross area.
I'm the sponsor.
Fantastic group, really, really nice group of people, and always fun to play football against you as well. Well, Freddie, thank you so much for that. That was brilliant, and best of luck for the year.
Thanks for having me, mate. I hope you lose on Saturday.
And I hope you do too.